I knew something was wrong the second I turned off the county road and onto the gravel path leading home. My tires crunched slowly across the dirt, but the familiar silhouette that usually rose against the western sky, my family's windmill, was missing. My chest tightened. I slammed the truck into park and jumped out before the engine even stopped. I ran across the field, boots thudding on dry earth, eyes scanning where the windmill should have stood. But all that remained was a wide patch of disturbed soil. Torn tire tracks, crushed weeds, a few splinters of old red-painted wood. Nothing else. No structure. No foundation. Just a gaping void where generations of my family had looked up and seen legacy. And then I saw it. A plastic sign, half buried in the dirt, flapping in the breeze. Removed for safety, HOA Compliance Enforcement, Greenridge Residential Association. I froze. Read it twice. Then I laughed, cold and bitter. Because that windmill? It wasn't just some old hunk of timber spinning in the breeze. It was registered on the National Renewable Heritage Registry, a federal list of historically protected environmental infrastructure. My grandfather built it in 1942. My father reinforced it in the 70s during the oil crisis. I personally restored it 2 years ago, with solar panels and a new turbine, certified and documented with the Department of Energy. That windmill wasn't just protected. It was untouchable by anyone who didn't have federal clearance. And now it was gone. Torn out like a weed. No notice. No contact. No due process. I clenched my jaw and took a slow breath, pulling out my phone. I took photos from every angle, the soil, the tire treads, the splinters, the damn sign. Then I opened a locked folder and scanned through some saved PDFs. Permit numbers. Federal Registry codes. Copies of the restoration approval from Washington. Yeah. I had receipts. But I didn't call anyone. Not yet. I didn't yell. Didn't storm into their shiny office down the hill like they expected some backwoods rancher to do. Because that's exactly what they thought I was. Just a guy with sunburned hands and wind-chapped cheeks. What they didn't know was that I spent my weekdays in a courthouse 3 hours away, wearing a tailored suit and a federal badge. I wasn't just the owner of this land. I was senior prosecutor for the Environmental Crimes Division, Department of Justice. And these people had just bulldozed their way into a federal offense. But I wasn't about to play that card yet. Not until I made sure the deck was stacked, the cameras rolling, and the whole damn house of cards was ready to fall. I stood there in the breeze where the windmill used to turn. The sun dipped behind the hills. The land was quiet. Still. But I could feel it, like the ground itself was holding its breath. That windmill had stood for 80 years. Now it was gone. And someone was going to answer for it. The next morning, I drove straight into Greenridge's HOA office. It looked more like a country club than a community office. Glass doors, stone columns, manicured hedges lining the parking lot. A water feature gurgled half-heartedly by the entrance, probably wasting more water than my entire ranch used in a month. Inside, the air was cold and overly citrus-scented. A young woman in a forest green polo sat behind the counter, chewing gum and scrolling on her phone. She didn't look up when I said, "I'm here to speak with whoever authorized the removal of my windmill." Her fingers paused mid-scroll. "Are you a resident of Greenridge?" "No," I replied steady. "I own the land adjacent to the east side of the subdivision." "Then you're not part of the association," she said without blinking. "Only members can request board meetings." I leaned forward slightly. "They didn't request a meeting when they rolled machinery onto my land and tore down a protected structure." That made her blink. Before she could recover, a man stepped out from a side hallway. Late 40s, slicked back hair, cheap suit trying to look expensive. His name tag read Michael Langston, HOA board president. "Well now," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little misunderstanding." I turned to face him. "No misunderstanding. Your people trespassed and removed federal property. I want to know who signed off." Michael spread his hands. Sir, we received complaints. Residents said your structure looked unstable. It posed a safety hazard near the walking trail. The trail that crosses my private property? I said. He smiled wider. The boundary line's been debated for years. It's an old survey. We've submitted a zoning adjustment to the county to bring it into conformity. I stared at him. He was lying, confidently, as if he'd done it 100 times. I didn't flinch. Do you have written authorization from the Department of Energy? A demolition permit? Landowner consent? Michael chuckled. We don't need federal clearance to remove dangerous structures within the neighborhood envelope. You weren't within the envelope, I said calmly. But thank you. This conversation's been helpful. And with that, I turned and walked out. I didn't need his admission, he just handed me intent, motive, and knowledge of action. All I needed next was pattern. And it didn't take long to find it. That same afternoon, I walked the property edge near the greenbelt where the subdivision trailed into my ranch. At first glance, everything looked normal. But tucked beneath a power pole, I noticed something odd, a small black device, barely larger than a deck of cards, zip-tied behind the transformer box. I pried it loose. A motion-activated camera. Infrared. I scanned the pole. Another was mounted higher, tucked beneath a fake birdhouse. Surveillance. On my land. Then came the strangers. 2 days later, I caught a group of 3 men in khakis and vests walking along my southern fence line. They carried clipboards, spoke in clip tones, and kept glancing at a tablet with a live map. When I approached in my ATV, they scattered like coyotes. Only one stood his ground. Survey crew, he said. We were contracted by the Homeowners Association to verify property lines for future community development. Did you file an easement permit with the county? The HOA said it wouldn't be necessary. I snapped a photo of his ID badge and license plate before sending him on his way. The next day, a letter arrived in my mailbox, sealed in a glossy envelope with the Greenridge HOA logo. Notice of noncompliance, failure to maintain acceptable perimeter appearance. Fines totaling $1,200 will be assessed unless resolved within 10 business days. A second envelope followed it. This one worse. Preliminary foreclosure warning. Per community standards, continued refusal to comply with HOA directives may result in property seizure under Section 14 of the Neighborhood Code. I read it twice. Then a third time. My land wasn't part of Greenridge. It never had been. I'd refused annexation twice over the past decade. But now they were pretending it already was. They were manufacturing fines. Laying legal groundwork for a fraudulent claim. I didn't panic. I documented everything. Then I started fighting back. First, I called in Claire Hobbs, an independent environmental cartographer I'd worked with on a protected watershed case in Colorado. She drove in 2 days later with high-precision mapping equipment and a thick binder of federal land survey overlays. We spent 6 hours walking the entire property. Claire confirmed it down to the inch. My land was untouched, unchanged, and entirely outside Greenridge's jurisdiction. Next, I installed my own surveillance system, 8 thermal trail cams, 2 motion-triggered drones, and a license plate scanner at the ranch entrance. Then, I filed a formal cease and desist order against Greenridge HOA, citing trespass, unauthorized survey attempts, and falsified documents. But I knew they wouldn't stop. Not yet. Because this wasn't about a windmill anymore. It was about the dirt under my boots. And someone out there wanted it bad enough to break the law. It started with the smell. I was reviewing zoning documents with Claire in my home office when the wind shifted. A strange, bitter scent, acrid chemical, wafted through the open window. I stood up slowly and stepped onto the porch. Then I saw it, black smoke rising from the east side of the ranch. The equipment shed. I didn't even grab my coat. By the time I got there, the flames had already chewed through the outer wall. The shed, a sturdy structure that housed the backup batteries for the windmill, plus tools, wiring, and maintenance logs, was ablaze from the inside out. Martin, my ranch hand and closest friend, arrived seconds later in the utility truck, fire extinguisher in hand. "What the hell happened?" "Call it in," I barked, already uncoiling the garden hose. "I think we've just been lit up." But we both knew that hose wouldn't do a damn thing. The fire was too fast. Too hot. The dry autumn air fed it like kindling, and within minutes the roof caved in with a thunderous crack. We stood there, powerless, watching the past few years of upgrades and investment turn to soot. An hour later, once the flames had burned themselves out and the sheriff's volunteer unit arrived, I walked through the blackened remains with a flashlight. The back wall had melted into itself. Metal brackets were twisted and scorched. The battery units, thick-cased, fire-resistant, had all ruptured. Then I saw it. Near the corner, behind the ruined inverter panel, a metal canister. I crouched down. It was warped, but I could still make out the label. Accelerant. Commercial grade. Someone had poured fuel in here before the fire started. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone had firebombed my power supply. I took pictures from every angle, sealed the canister in a plastic bag, and walked back to the house without a word. Inside, I locked the door, opened a secure channel, and called the only man I trusted with what came next. "Carter?" A gruff voice answered. "What's wrong?" "I'm activating it," I said. "They burned the shed." Marshal Daniel Reese didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. We'd served on multiple environmental enforcement cases together: cross-state water theft, illegal fracking sites, corrupt zoning boards. He knew what arson on federal registered land meant. "Send me everything you've got," he said. "And get ready. If we move on this, it won't stay quiet. I'm counting on that." Over the next 3 hours, I compiled everything. Photos. Camera footage. Timeline. The HOA's trespassing notices. The fake fines. The surveillance devices. And now, the fire. But they weren't finished. The next morning, just as Martin was hauling out replacement tools from the main barn, he shouted my name. I ran out to see a white utility van driving off from behind the workshop. The company name on the side: SolarNet Maintenance and Monitoring. "Do we even use them?" Martin asked. I shook my head. Never heard of them. I checked the solar array, 6 panels mounted high on a rotating rig, feeding the house and backup systems. One of the battery converters was missing. The wires were clipped, not unscrewed, cut hastily, like someone was in a rush. I called SolarNet. They confirmed no work orders had been placed. No technicians had been dispatched. I reviewed the footage from our entrance cam. The van had no front license plate. 2 men in high-vis vests had jumped the fence. They walked straight to the array like they'd been here before. And they stole from it. They weren't just trying to hurt my property now, they were cutting off power, isolating systems, pulling the plug piece by piece. Was the HOA out of control in this story? Comment yes. If you think they crossed the line, or no. If they had a point. That's when I started building the case. Not the one for court. Not yet. The one for war. I filed an official complaint with the Department of Energy and the EPA. Then I finished drafting a legal trigger I'd been holding back on for years, an environmental federal injunction against unlawful interference in registered green infrastructure zones. The windmill had been certified. So had the shed. So had the solar bank. The moment Greenridge HOA touched those, they opened themselves up to criminal liability under Title 18, Section 1366, Destruction of Energy Facilities. I printed the forms. Signed them. Sent them through DOJ channels that didn't go through the state, because this was now beyond local law. By nightfall, I had 2 responses. One from a Department of Energy attorney in D.C. Reviewing immediately. Preliminary injunction looks likely. And one from Marshal Reese. We're moving. Do not engage them directly. They're crossing lines now. But even with that, I didn't sleep. I sat up at my desk, staring at the scorched field through the window. In the distance, I could still smell the remnants of the fire. They thought I'd break. That if they couldn't scare me with paper, they'd smoke me out. But here's the thing. I don't scare easy. And I never back down. 3 days after I filed the injunction, I got the call I'd been expecting. Marshal Reese again, voice low and measured. We traced the funding. I sat forward. And? It's not just the HOA, he said. Greenridge Association receives the majority of its operational budget from a limited partnership based out of Miami. The money passes through 3 layers of shell corporations. But we found the source. I waited. Veralta Holdings. A foreign-backed development conglomerate. Based in the Caymans. They specialize in acquiring distressed rural land and converting it into high-profit smart housing zones. I exhaled slowly. So this was never about compliance. No, Reese said. This is a land grab. Legalized theft under the disguise of neighborhood management. It all clicked into place. The forged fines. The fake foreclosure letters. The surveillance. The sabotage. They weren't trying to intimidate me. They were trying to force me out, to make the land unusable, then claim it for pennies once I defaulted. And if that failed? Just burn me off the map. I sent over everything else I had, drone footage, missing solar gear, the accelerant from the fire. Within hours, DOJ analysts looped in the RICO task force. What started as one landowner's dispute had just escalated to federal investigation status. And still, Greenridge stayed silent. No calls. No letters. Not even a fake apology. They weren't retreating. They were recalculating. Which is why, when the knock came at dusk 2 days later, I didn't answer it with surprise, I answered it with caution. A man stood on the porch, older, with graying temples and worn boots. No clipboard. No logo on his coat. Just tired eyes and a folded envelope in one hand. I'm not here to fight, he said. Name's Glenn. I used to sit on the HOA board. Quit last week. I didn't speak. I came to tell you, he said quietly. Not all of us agreed with what they were doing. Ed, the current president, he pushed this too far. We thought we were just annexing unused land to buffer property values. But when the fires started? When the solar system got ripped out? Glenn shook his head. That wasn't us. That came from the outside. Veralta Holdings, I said. He blinked. So you know. I know enough. He held out the envelope. Meeting minutes. Internal memos. Copies of transfers. They used us as cover. HOA's signatures to legitimize actions that were already funded and planned months ago. I took the envelope and nodded once. Why tell me now? Because this won't stop unless someone makes it public. And from what I hear, you're the one who can do it. Glenn walked off into the night without asking for protection, credit, or thanks. The next morning, I scanned every document. Wire transfers. Meeting records. Backdated zoning requests. HOA votes that never happened. One email caught my eye, forwarded from Ed to the board. If Carter's land goes offline for even a week, Veralta's option window kicks in. We seize, we build. That simple. They didn't just plan to take it. They planned to sell it before it was even gone. I packaged the entire file and sent it straight to DOJ. 4 hours later, my phone buzzed. This time, it wasn't Reese, it was a new voice. Female, sharp, deliberate. Mr. Carter, this is Hannah Thomas, lead investigator for the Department of Justice. We've received your files. I'm calling to inform you that we are opening a formal RICO investigation into Greenridge HOA and all affiliated entities. Good, I said. And just so you know, your case may be the first, but it won't be the last. We've had similar complaints from 5 other states. Arizona, Georgia, Nebraska, Montana, even California. This is bigger than Greenridge. I looked out across the scorched field where my shed had once stood. I figured. Hannah's tone softened. We'll need a site visit. A full walk-through. Would you be available this week? I'll be here. And I meant that. Because now, this wasn't just about me. Or my windmill. Or even my land. This was about every person who ever got bullied by a clipboard and a made-up rulebook. And someone was finally listening. By the end of that week, I made the decision. We were going to rebuild the windmill. Not a modern version. Not some sleek steel tower with fiberglass blades. The original. Same structure. Same design. Same heart. I dug through the old cedar chest in the attic, under layers of blankets and brittle paperwork until I found what I was looking for, a set of rolled blueprints, yellowed and soft around the edges. Drawn in pencil by my grandfather in 1941. The plans were simple, strong, and handwritten in the corner was a small note. To stand through storms is to stand together. It hit harder than I expected. I stared at that line for a long moment, then picked up the phone and called Martin. "Let's get started," I said. "We're putting her back where she belongs." Word spread fast. Faster than I thought it would. The next day, a retired carpenter from the next county showed up at the gate with a truck bed full of reclaimed timber. "Saw the news," he said. "Figured you might need help." An hour later, a teacher from the local high school pulled in with 3 students from the shop class. "Extra credit project," she smiled. "And maybe a little history lesson." By the weekend, there were over a dozen people working alongside us. Some brought nails. Others brought lunches. One family brought their old wind vane, saying it hadn't spun in years but it still held up to the storms. It wasn't just a rebuild anymore. It was a movement. If you believe legacy is worth fighting for, tap like. It helps stories like this reach others who've battled unfair HOAs. Every beam we raised, every bolt we fastened, felt like a piece of something bigger than ourselves going back into the earth. It was defiance. It was unity. And it was hope. 4 days in, while digging out the base for the main supports, Martin hit something hard. "You better come see this," he called. Buried beneath a rusted metal capstone was a small, sealed tin box. We pried it open together. Inside was a folded letter, wrapped in oilcloth to keep it dry. It was from my grandfather. Written in bold, slanted handwriting. "To whoever finds this, know that this land has meaning. This windmill stood through dust, drought, war, and change. It will stand again. And if you're reading this, it's because someone tried to knock it down. Don't let them. The land is stronger than greed. But only if we remember why we fight to keep it." Martin cleared his throat, voice low. "He knew." I nodded. "They always do." We mounted that letter, etched into a bronze plaque, and fixed it to the center beam of the new windmill. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the structure stood half complete against the golden sky, I looked around at the people gathered. There were ranchers, teachers, teens, grandparents. A woman with her baby strapped to her chest handing up bolts to her husband on a ladder. This wasn't just about history anymore. It was about belonging. I took a moment to walk out alone to the edge of the field and looked at the frame silhouetted against the sky. Then I whispered, "It's coming back, Grandpa. And they'll never take it again." The federal courthouse was packed. Not just with lawyers and press, but with neighbors, former HOA members, even a few ranchers who had driven in from counties away. Some came out of curiosity. Others came out of solidarity. They'd heard the story, a federal prosecutor fighting an HOA from his front porch. But only a handful of people in that room knew I was the prosecutor in question. Until that morning. I walked into the courtroom in a charcoal suit, briefcase in hand, and sat at the plaintiff's table beside my attorney, Ethan Reyes, a sharp litigator with a quiet fire behind his eyes. Across the room, Greenridge's legal team looked smug. Ed Langston, HOA president, sat behind them with his arms crossed like a man waiting for a parking ticket to be dismissed. The judge entered, Honorable Karen Mendez, no-nonsense, ex-military, federal bench for over 15 years. She glanced at the case file, then looked up. "Mr. Carter, are you prepared to make your opening?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honor. But first, I'd like to clarify something for the record. She nodded. I turned to face the room. My name is Samuel Carter. I am the plaintiff in this matter. I am also a senior federal environmental crimes prosecutor for the Department of Justice. And I have been gathering evidence on the Greenridge HOA for the past 60 days. There was a beat of silence. Then the reporters started scribbling. Ed shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I continued. This HOA, under the guise of community safety and regulation, committed multiple felonies: unlawful demolition of a federally registered structure, surveillance and trespass, arson of green infrastructure, and attempted land seizure through falsified documentation. Ethan took it from there, methodical, calm, lethal. He laid out everything: the removal of the windmill, the faked fines, the camera devices, the nighttime trespassing, the fire, the missing solar converter, the anonymous foreclosure threats, and finally, the wire transfers from Veralta Holdings. Then came the bombshell: the internal emails. The ones Glenn had delivered in the envelope. Projected on the courtroom monitor was Ed's exact message. If Carter's land goes offline for even a week, Veralta's option window kicks in. We seize, we build. That simple. Ed's attorney scrambled to object, calling the message taken out of context. Judge Mendez shut it down fast. Save it for cross-examination. The defense squirmed for another 20 minutes, offering vague explanations about administrative errors and overzealous enforcement. But it was over. Judge Mendez closed her binder and spoke clearly. This court finds substantial cause to issue an immediate injunction against Greenridge HOA and its enforcement division, and refers all associated criminal claims to the Department of Justice. Furthermore, she looked directly at Ed Langston. Mr. Langston, you are hereby remanded to federal custody pending charges of conspiracy to defraud, destruction of protected infrastructure, and willful obstruction of environmental oversight. Ed's jaw dropped. 2 U.S. Marshals moved quickly and quietly. He tried to protest, but no one was listening anymore. The courtroom erupted. Some gasped. Some applauded. A few just sat in stunned silence. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The next morning, headlines broke nationwide. HOA president arrested in federal land scheme. DOJ launches multi-state RICO probe into HOA abuse. Greenridge investigation triggers congressional review. By week's end, congressional representatives began drafting the Homeowner Fairness and Accountability Act, a bill to regulate large-scale HOAs with federal oversight, mandatory audits, and criminal liability for abuse of power. I didn't ask for it. But maybe, the fight I started would keep others from having to. Want more real HOA Karen stories like this one? Hit subscribe and comment more so we know to keep them coming. The new windmill turned slow and steady in the evening breeze, its blades slicing through golden light as the sun dipped low behind the hills. Martin stood beside me, arms crossed, quiet for once. No sirens. No lawsuits. No threats. Just wind and peace. The land was whole again. Not because we rebuilt a structure, but because we refused to be erased. Justice had been served. And legacy had been preserved. I took one last look at the windmill and smiled. They thought they could tear down a windmill. But they didn't realize they were facing the storm itself. In the end, this story wasn't just about a windmill, it was about something far greater, the quiet power of standing your ground. In a world where powerful organizations often trample over the voices of ordinary people, it's easy to feel like we have no say. But the truth is, when you know your rights, when you stay rooted in your values, and when you fight with patience and principle, you become unstoppable. It's also a reminder that legacy matters. Whether it's a bridge, a barn, or a windmill, the things we inherit, and choose to preserve, carry meaning that money can't buy. These aren't just structures. They're symbols of who we are, where we come from, and what we refuse to surrender. Lastly, this story speaks to the strength of community. No one wins these battles alone. It takes neighbors showing up, standing beside you, and saying, "This land has worth, and so do you." So the next time someone says, "It's just a rule," or "It's just progress," remember, the line in the sand is yours to draw. And sometimes, drawing that line changes everything.